We are coming on the air with a message from President Biden to Ukraine. We're behind you for as long as it takes, with U.S. allies coming together for an emergency meeting to show solidarity against Russia. But the aid money may not flow forever. We're going to explain how the midterms could change that. Plus, some breaking news we're following. The DOJ wanting the Supreme Court to reject former President Trump's request to let the special master look at the classified documents taken from Mar-a-Lago. Why they're calling his ask unprecedented. Plus, a plea from the defense attorney in the death penalty trial of Parkland murderer Nikolas Cruz. Why he's begging a jury to choose life for a man who took the lives of 17 other people. And kids 8 and older will be screened for anxiety for the very first time. Why researchers say these tests are more important than ever. Plus, the stocks of popular rideshare apps are ending the day in the red after new proposed rules from the White House to help gig workers become employees. Could it affect the cost of your ride? And in tonight's original, we look at Florida's mangroves, how these trees help protect the Florida Keys from hurricanes, and why they now need help of their own. Hey, everybody, I'm Yasmin, in for Hallie. And today, in a last-minute emergency meeting, U.S. and G7 allies reassuring Ukraine that Western help is not going anywhere, that they're still willing to back the country as Russian missiles wreck multiple cities for the second day in a row. This virtual meeting happening because we really haven't seen Ukraine get attacked at a level like this before, since the early days, of course, of the war. 19 people have been killed so far, over 100 more hurt. So this afternoon, John Kirby of the White House National Security Council saying the U.S. will be giving Ukraine more air defense help. And it's coming after President Biden this morning said that the U.S. will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. So if this sounds familiar, it's because we've been hearing this messaging before from the president. And so far, it has, in fact, worked. The White House has been able to keep up bipartisan support, sending over $16 billion in financial, military, humanitarian aid as well to Ukraine since the beginning of Russia's invasion. But we're starting to see some signs that could be shifting. Now, some Republicans are skeptical about why the U.S. is spending so much money on a war overseas that's now going on 8 months, with one recent Pew poll showing that more and more Republicans think the U.S. has given too much support to Ukraine. And adding more pressure, the White House is rethinking their relationship with Saudi Arabia after a Saudi and Russian-led coalition decided to cut global oil production, which, by the way, is likely to increase gas prices once again. Just weeks, of course, before voters are heading to the polls for the midterms. With that, want to bring in Monica Alba now, who's joining us from the White House. A lot to get to, Monica, to say the least. And it's notable, by the way, to say this day we're still hearing President Biden say the U.S. is ready to help for as long as it takes. But it seems like this rhetoric, it's on shaky ground, right, as I put it, given how costly it's become to provide that help with an election just weeks away.
And it's a question that was posed to the White House just this afternoon, Yasmin. If Republicans do take control of the House or Senate or both, what would it mean for the future of this funding for Ukraine? And in essence, the White House says, let's wait and see what happens. But they want to completely underscore they feel that this kind of assistance is essential and that they want to continue to provide it. But of course, we have to look at the political reality that may soon shift if indeed the GOP takes one of those chambers, and it will be a larger debate. And the other thing here, though, that you notice and mentioned is that there could be some bipartisan support for continuing this kind of aid and humanitarian assistance. Maybe it wouldn't be necessarily this other kind of money that's going or these other missile systems. That is still up for debate. But right now, that's why they are acting as quickly as they can. According to the National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, they're working toward providing that as soon as possible. That is what the emergency meeting was about earlier today. And President Biden says that he is resolute in supporting the people of Ukraine, the president of Ukraine, as he continues to call out Russia for war crimes and atrocities, Yasmin.
Let's talk about the Saudi factor as well, Monica, while I have you. And that's, of course, the oil factor amidst all of this and the decision when it comes to OPEC. Saudi Arabia cutting oil production. It's almost certain to increase gas prices here that have been on the downside, we should say, over the last couple of weeks, right? There was some positivity when it came to that inside the White House. We also just heard Democratic Senator Bob Menendez calling for an immediate freeze on all U.S. cooperation with Saudi. How is the administration now reevaluating that relationship right now, given the fact, by the way, that Russia and Saudi Arabia are still the second and third biggest oil producers in the world, an economy, by the way, top of mind for many Americans heading into the midterm, specifically gas prices?
It's a really important angle to all of this, Yasmin. And right now, the White House says that they are evaluating all of these different options. And what's going to come first is a review in the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. So what does that mean? Right now, they aren't saying who's going to lead that review, except that the president has ordered it. He is likely to speak with members of Congress, specifically some of those senators who have been calling for some specific actions. So the White House isn't ready to say what they're going to do, just that they're going to take a step back and see what might need to change. And it does seem here like this could be an administration-wide review. There could be other agencies involved. Again, the president will likely speak to members of Congress and other key stakeholders to come up with an assessment, and then he will announce that. But the White House did not provide any kind of timeline for how long this might take. It really could be weeks. It could be months. It could be, as you know, a long time, and after certainly the midterm election. So that question of gas prices on the mind of a lot of voters as they see that go up at the pump, that's not something that likely will be resolved here or reevaluated by the time they go to the ballot box.
All right, Monica Alba-Forrest of the White House. Thank you, Monica. Great to talk to you. We're following some breaking news, everybody. The Justice Department asking the Supreme Court to stay out of its investigation into the seizure of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. The DOJ's response, it's coming after the former president asked the Supreme Court to allow the special master reviewing the seized documents to access those that are marked classified. Ken Delanian joining us now with more on this. This just breaking really in the last, I guess, hour or so, Ken. Talk to us about what this means.
Yasmin, the Justice Department is saying in this 34-page brief that Trump has not even attempted to explain how he's irreparably injured by the Court of Appeals partial stay, which the DOJ says simply prevents the disclosure of classified documents bearing classification markings in the special master review while the government appeals. So basically, the appeals court has ruled that the special master has no right to see these classified documents. And now Trump has gone to the Supreme Court and asked the Supreme Court to overturn that. The DOJ is saying, wait a second, there's no legal case for this. Trump needs to be able to show that he's been harmed by this decision. And they're saying, how could he be harmed? These are not his documents. They're calling this an unprecedented attempt to restrict the government's ability to have access to its own classified information. And now we will see whether the Supreme Court decides to take this case. And I should explain, Yasmin, that this is entirely separate from what the DOJ is doing before the 11th Circuit. They are appealing the entire special master process. And they're doing that on an expedited basis. If they win that, then the special master goes away completely. And in the meantime, they do now still have access to these classified documents in their criminal investigation.
Any indication, Ken, as to when we would hear from the Supreme Court on this?
No, but since this was kind of an emergency request, I think it'll be rather soon.
Okay. Ken Delanian for us. Thank you. So just before we came on the air, everybody, in a Fort Lauderdale courtroom, the lead defense attorney for the Parkland school shooter told the jury her client's life was literally in their hands. She urged them to choose, quote, mercy and compassion by giving Nikolas Cruz a life sentence instead of the death penalty. Take a listen.
Sentencing Nikolas to death will change absolutely nothing. You can show Nikolas Cruz all the things that he did not show those 17 victims.
Cruz pled guilty last October to killing 14 students and 3 staff members in February of 2018, one of the country's deadliest school shootings. Over the course of the trial, the jury heard emotional testimony, accounts of what happened that day from teachers, students who watched their classmates, the people they know and love, die. Carrie Sanders is joining us now with more on this. Carrie, if you would, take us inside that courtroom, especially when it comes to these closing arguments over the last 3 months. While this thing has been ongoing, the jury has seen security video of the shooting, autopsy photos, dozens, as I mentioned, witness testimony. Walk us through what more we heard in these closing arguments today.
It has been, Yasmin, it's been overwhelming for the family members, the survivors who were victimized, who decided to come and watch this for the last 4 months. And then, of course, for the 12-member jury who may actually need some psychological counseling themselves after seeing this, after hearing this, after going through what was essentially a 6 or 7 minute shooting spree that has been recounted from every angle and every detail during this sentencing phase of the trial. Of course, the gunman here, Nikolas Cruz, has confessed that he did shoot and kill 17, that he did attempt to kill 17 others. Michael Satz is the prosecutor here. He was the state attorney for a very long time. He decided to stay on and give up that political position just to finalize this case here. And today, in his closing, where he was pleading with the jury for the death penalty, he spoke minute by minute, second by second of what happened. It took him more than 90 minutes to describe what happened in that 6-7 minute period when the gunman went into the school and began shooting. And as you'll hear Michael Satz say, he believes that there is only one logical conclusion here, and that is the death penalty. This is what he had to say.
There is no brain damage. There is damage to his personality and to his character. And hate is not a mental disorder. The appropriate sentence for Nikolas Cruz is the death penalty.
The prosecutor trying to make it clear that there is no mitigating circumstance here, that the gunman, Nikolas Cruz, was the child born disadvantaged because his mother had an addiction problem. They made it very clear that he grew up in Parkland in a house with 4,500 square feet with a swimming pool, that there were the types of things that were afforded to him to have the same life as others, and that there is not a reason that anybody can understand as to why he would have gone off the rails and committed the murders as he did, Yasmin.
Carrie, can you just take me inside the courtroom quickly? The people that were there watching these closing arguments, I suspect parents of victims.
Yeah, there are parents of victims who at times during the trial and again today, as the details were explained to the jury in really graphic detail, they couldn't stand it and actually got up and left the courtroom. But those that have come here have felt that it is important that they remain in the courtroom, hear everything that is presented, and do all that they can. In fact, they've given some victim statements, but to do all that they can to make sure that the justice system lives up to the promise of the justice system. Before this, there was a very big debate of whether this should go forward. Some of the victims felt that it was just too much to endure. The defense for Nikolas Cruz had said, we will plead guilty, give us a life sentence. And the prosecutor again said, no, you go ahead and if you want to, go ahead and plead guilty, but we're going to go to the sentencing phase and we're going to ask for a death penalty. And in Florida, like most states that have the death penalty, it's lethal injection, but Florida also still has the electric chair should the inmate who is then convicted and sentenced to death decides that that's how they want to die. Yasmin?
Just for folks to understand this, the jury must in fact be unanimous for Nikolas Cruz to get the death penalty here. Carrie Sanders for us, as always.
All 12 jurors.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Appreciate it. Let's head over to the campaign trail, everybody, where right now in Atlanta, Senator Raphael Warnock is meeting with voters just as some of his anti-abortion colleagues on Capitol Hill are rushing to the aid of his Republican opponent, Herschel Walker. You see there Senators Rick Scott, Tom Cotton, laying out this show of force that says the party is not backing away from Walker despite allegations that he paid a woman to have an abortion back in 2009. This is Walker's first public appearance since NBC News obtained text between his wife and the woman that Walker says he does not know whether or not she terminated a pregnancy, dismissing what he says are lies against him.
Right now, you can see what they're doing. They'll do whatever it takes, say whatever they have to say because they want this seat right here. but I don't think they know that they woke up a bear.
Hallie Rafa is joining us now on the trail for us in Carrollton, Georgia. Hallie, good to see you out there. Just a reminder for folks, by the way, Walker wants a federal ban on abortions without exceptions. Pretty extreme there, to say the least. And today he's talking about everything except that.
That's right, Yasmin. Yeah, allegations as serious as these would have typically sunk in any other GOP candidate. But from what we saw today, you really couldn't even tell that there was this much controversy surrounding Herschel Walker amid these allegations that this ex-girlfriend alleges that he paid for her abortion in 2009, pressured her to have a second one 2 years later. She says they broke up when she refused. But you couldn't tell any of that on the stage when Walker appeared with these two GOP heavyweight senators, Rick Scott, Tom Cotton, both coming to his defense. And really, they didn't bring up abortion at all, at least in Walker's case. He brought up issues like inflation, high gas prices, family values, drugs on the border, issues he says are more important to voters than his past. That is something that tracks with what Republican voters here at this event told me. They said that they don't care about Herschel Walker's past. What is in the past is in the past, and they are focused on the issues at hand. They wish that this would all go away, Yasmin.
Wondering, as you're speaking to voters out there as well, Hallie, if any folks are reacting at all to some of the video messages, the tweets that were put out by Herschel Walker's son.
So those allegations are mostly paid attention to by Democrats here. But even these allegations, you know, there's been a string of controversies in Herschel Walker's past since he announced his candidacy. Obviously, these domestic violence claims. He has admitted to mental health issues. Now you have these recent abortion allegations, and that is something that's not really tracking with Republicans. They're saying that first of all, they're saying that they don't believe them, and others are saying even if they were true, that it wouldn't matter because they're more focused on how he would vote if he is elected to the Senate. If a vote to codify Roe versus Wade was ever brought up again, remember that vote didn't even pass a preliminary vote to be able to be voted on the Senate floor back in February. That's what they're most focused on here, the policy, not the personal past of Herschel Walker. Democrats, meanwhile, want to keep abortion rights at the forefront, at the top of voters' minds. But they tell me that with high gas prices, soaring inflation, that's becoming even harder, especially as those prices only grow higher in these last 4 weeks until these critical midterms, Yasmin.
I'm wondering, though, as we're talking about this, right, we mentioned, of course, Herschel Walker's son, Christian, has made some allegations, certainly online. While Senator Raphael Warnock is not necessarily talking about that, there is a new out there from a Democratic super PAC using a tweet from his son. Let's watch that.
He threatened to kill us and had us move 6 times in 6 months, running from his violence, showing up at his ex-wife's house armed with a gun and refusing to leave.
So expand on that, Hallie, if you will, a little bit. How much Democrats are actually focusing on this? I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but then ultimately, how much, as you talk about a little bit earlier, abortion is driving this conversation?
Yeah. Voters on the ground here say they want to keep abortion at the top of people's minds, but I think it's notable that the Democratic incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock is not bringing this up, not using this allegations, these controversies to his advantage on the campaign trail. He has only brought it up once on the campaign trail when specifically asked about it, and that's because he walks a very fine line here. He said that he is for abortion rights, but he respects everybody's right to an opinion, right to whatever they want. But I can tell you, having been on the ground here the past few days, watching the local newscast, this is not something that is being brought up. Issues like I said, crime, inflation, high gas prices, that is what voters are talking about here on the ground in Georgia, Yasmin.
All right, Hallie Rafa for us. Thank you, Hallie. Appreciate it. All right, elsewhere on the trail, everybody, a senior Democratic official telling our colleagues at CNBC that President Biden's going to join Pennsylvania Democratic Senate candidate John Fetterman at a fundraiser next week. Polling averages showing Fetterman's lead, it's shrinking. He leads Republican Mehmet Oz by just 6 points. That is down from almost 11 points a month ago. Ardasha Burns sat down with Fetterman in an exclusive interview, which used closed captioning because of his ongoing recovery from a stroke back in May. And Fetterman spoke about the stakes of this election, including when it comes to abortion. Listen.
On the issue of abortion, I just want to clarify your position there. do you believe that the government should be able to set guardrails on abortion, or do you believe that this is a decision that should only be made between a woman and her doctor?
I'm saying that Roe v. Wade should have never fallen, and that should be codified into law. You know, that's my answer on it, and to be absolutely clear.
But you say you want to codify Roe v. Wade, which protects a woman's right to abortion before viability, but allows states to enact abortion restrictions after that. So do you want to codify Roe v. Wade, or do you want to leave the decision just between a woman and her doctor?
I don't know how much clearer I can say. Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade. That's the way it should have been. That's the way it was for the last 50 years, and that's the way it should be. And we should, you know, and I would vote to call get rid of the filibuster and deliver that if I was the senator or that kind of a vote.
Dasha is joining us now from Pittsburgh on this. Let's talk through some of this interview, Dasha, because as I came to you a little bit earlier, I mentioned, of course, his health and how he hasn't necessarily outright addressed some of the issues that folks have concerns about, while Fetterman is saying his health is not necessarily a factor, also saying in lockstep not to expect many details about that.
Yeah, Yasmin, and he said in our interview at the same time that the stroke has changed everything. He talked about how it made him a more empathetic person, helped him to better understand what everyday Americans are dealing with. But you're absolutely right. Look, this was a very different interview from the conversation I had with him at his home back in Braddock back in May, before the primary, before the stroke. Not only was the nature of the conversation different, but the entire environment was different, right? You saw there, you mentioned it, closed captioning. That's something Fetterman needs in order to understand what people are saying. He has auditory processing issues. It's one of the lingering symptoms of the stroke, where basically he has a hard time understanding what he's hearing. So he was able to understand my questions as he was reading a live transcription on his computer screen. You saw him glancing at the screen there as I was asking him those questions. He still has some challenges with speech as well. And you can imagine how difficult that might be, you know, on the trail, talking to voters, all of the sort of typical things that a politician deals with. Now, the campaign tells us he's well on his way to a full recovery. He maintained that he can do this job on day one if elected. And I'll say, you know, experts that I've spoken to about stroke say that these are symptoms that folks can recover from. The auditory processing, the speech, he's well within the timeline of healing. But I'll say, you know, at rallies where we've seen him over the course of a couple of weeks, we've also noticed some improvements. But every caveat, every doctor we talk to gives a caveat that they can't assess a patient without details. Right. We have asked for medical records. We've asked for interviews with his medical team, and those so far have been denied, Yasmin.
We know, as we've been watching this thing play out in Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz has really kind of been honing in on the health issues that Fetterman continues to deal with, and his kind of lack of transparency with that. But in your interview, Dasha, he did get a little bit reflective when he talked about really just needing to take better care of himself.
Yeah, I mean, he's talked about it a lot over the course of the last few months, kind of what a wake-up call this was. He had ignored some of his health issues. His doctor, in the letter they did release shortly after the stroke, sort of chastised him for not doing better, not following up on some of his heart issues. And he talked to me about the challenge every day of having a conversation with your wife, with your children, that things are different. And you'll see also on that debate, October 25th, he will be using closed captioning technology. He also, in our interview, committed to showing up on that debate stage with his opponent, Dr. Mehmet Oz, no matter what. Yasmin.
Dasha Burns for us. Thank you. By the way, you can see more of Dasha's exclusive interview with Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman tonight on NBC Nightly News at 6:30 Eastern on your local NBC station. All right, coming up, everybody, NASA's big news on what happened when it plowed a spacecraft into an asteroid. Did its test to save the world work? We have got the pictures for you. Plus, the rumors were true, everybody. If you didn't think so, we know. Blink-182's back with a founding member and new music. That's one of our 5 things. Stay with us. For the first time ever, anxiety screenings are being recommended for children 8 and older. This is coming from a panel of experts put together by the Department of Health and Human Services. The panel is also reaffirming its previous recommendation to screen kids 12 and older for depression. These recommendations, they apply to all children, by the way, even those who have not shown any symptoms. Why, you ask? Because anxiety cases in children, they are rising. A federal study showing kids diagnosed with anxiety rose by 29% from 2016 to 2020. Researchers saying the COVID pandemic may have been a major factor in that increase. Dr. Akshay Sayal is joining me now. I wonder, and because I was thinking that as I got to that, obviously the pandemic kind of feeding into this, right? The lack of the unknown, right, of the last 2 or 3 years and the fear that a lot of these kids had. I wonder if it's also because the numbers we're seeing rise because we're more aware ultimately of mental health, right? We don't see mental health as we kind of used to, this taboo thing, right? We're now confronting it head on.
Yeah, I think not just for kids, for adults too, across the board, you're seeing people are more open to talking about mental health. You're seeing celebrities come out and say, hey, listen, I suffer from anxiety, I suffer from depression, I'm on this medication. And I think ultimately that's a good thing. You know, it's always better to have an open, honest conversation about it. And it's something that's not so easy to talk about. In terms of what this report's saying, you know, screen kids as young as 8 for anxiety and 12 for depression. You want to catch these things early because you never know if your kid may be suffering in silence.
So they're not necessarily giving guidance, though, on how to do the screening, it seems, right?
Well, so there are a couple questionnaires we use, and those questions, one of them is called a PHQ-9. So basically the questions go, you know, over the last 2 weeks, have you had a sense of hopelessness? Have you not been eating? I mean, it's really meant to weed out, you know, somebody who may be going through a quick rough patch versus somebody who actually has a mental health problem.
So what is the differentiation between screening your kid for depression at 12 versus anxiety at 8?
So it's the task force that determined this, and they kind of go through all the evidence that they've determined. And right now, the evidence really suggests anxiety at 8 and depression at 12. If you know, in the future, those numbers could change, and we could start both at 8, we could start both at 12. But for now, that's what they're going with.
And then what? Okay, so you find out your kid at 8 years old, 9 years old has anxiety. What options do you have for adults? Of course, if you have anxiety, you take medication. You feel more comfortable probably doing that. But for a child of 8 or 9 years old, that's new territory for parents.
It's new territory for parents, and I think it's a little unnerving. You know, you don't want your kid who's 8 years old who's showing signs of anxiety, you don't want to immediately jump to medication. And I think not just kids, but adults in general, we tend to use medications to solve a lot of our problems as opposed to trying other things first, just because of time and money and ease. So if they are experiencing these signs, you can try things like therapy and other things. But you really want to be referred to a specialist if you test positive on these screenings.
Big proponent of therapy myself. I go to therapy.
I think
and it helps me tremendously. If you can get therapy, if you can afford therapy, if you're lucky enough to be able to afford therapy, it's great to be able to talk to someone through all of it. Dr. Akshay Sayal, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
All right, so let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Iran is ramping up its crackdown in the country's Kurdish areas. People have been protesting there since the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. She was Kurdish, and she died last month while detained by morality police there. Now some oil workers are striking to stand in solidarity with the protesters across the country. Number 2, Hockey Canada says its CEO is out and its entire board of directors will step down after months of controversy. The organization has been under fire for its handling of sexual assault allegations against players on the 2003 and 2018 men's junior national teams and for how it paid out settlements. Hockey Canada says it'll put an interim management committee in place to guide it until a new board is elected. Number 3, stage, film, and television star Angela Lansbury died today. She was 96 years old, just a few days short of her 97th birthday. Her career spanned decades, including performances in 1962's The Manchurian Candidate, longtime TV show Murder, She Wrote, huge fan, and as Mrs. Potts in Beauty and the Beast. Number 4, Buckingham Palace announcing King Charles's coronation date today. It will be on May 6th at Westminster Abbey. Kings and queens of England have been crowned there for nearly 1,000 years. Number 5, the band is back together, everybody. Blink-182's Tom DeLonge, Travis Barker, and Mark Hoppus will go on tour together for the first time in almost a decade. DeLonge left the group in 2015. They also announced they will release a new song on Friday. All right, over to Wall Street. Let's talk money for a second. Stocks for some of the apps we use every day closing down after new guidelines from the White House today that may help millions of workers. You see Uber, Lyft, DoorDash as well, all ending the day in the red, the first two down double digits. Ouch, because these rules basically will give a clear roadmap for regulators or courts to let independent contractors reclassify as employees. That could lead to higher wages or other new protections, as well as higher prices if they pass those costs on to us, people that are taking these ride-sharing apps. Deidre Bozis, the co-anchor of CNBC's Tech Check, is joining us now with more on this. Deidre, thanks for joining us on this. This is major, right? A lot of folks kind of scratching their heads wondering, okay, is my Uber ride that used to cost $12 now going to cost $24 if, in fact, this happens? Lay out a little bit, if you could, some of these proposals, these new rules that they're proposing, how they could make a difference for gig workers, and could they, in fact, upend the business models of these companies?
They absolutely could, but I should note that we are still a long way from that point. So ride-sharing prices, they have already been getting more expensive because of things like inflation. There was a shortage of drivers. This would really upend the business models and could potentially pass on those higher costs to consumers, as you said. So right now, gig economy workers, they're considered independent contractors. So they can basically log onto the app, take out their cars and drive and earn money sort of whenever they want. This proposal from the Department of Labor could potentially reclassify them as employees. So perhaps a little bit less flexibility, but they would have more benefits and protections, things like minimum wage, medical leave, overtime pay. So that's really the key difference here. And that would add a lot of costs to the companies. Remember, these companies were built with them as independent contractors. It's going to cost them and us a lot more to change that classification.
So it's corporations essentially versus potential kind of on-staff employees. We saw what took place in California, right? Uber, Lyft, they basically launched this $100 million campaign to kill that state's efforts there. Do folks on Wall Street believe they're going to try and kind of launch this federal campaign to put pressure on the White House?
It's a great point. We saw what happened in California. As you said, they spent $100 million combined collectively, these gig economy companies. That was the most expensive ballot proposal in California history. So there's a playbook. We know what they would do. We know that they would spend a lot of money once again to fight this at the federal level. Now, a clarification, though, what drivers want, that is somewhat divided. Some drivers, they want to be considered employees for that protection and those benefits. However, some actually enjoy that independent contractor status because they believe it gives them more flexibility. Wall Street here, as you can tell by the share prices today, unnerved. They are nervous that this is going to lead to more regulatory risk, which has plagued these companies essentially for as long as they have been public companies. But, you know, in some cases, by Uber's own estimates, it could add 20 to 120% more to the fares. And we just don't know if demand is that elastic, if people are going to pay for that. And remember, this is the time, too, when the markets are really turbulent and volatile at the moment, that investors, they want to see better profitability from these companies. They still lose billions of dollars, and this certainly would not help that case. I was
just thinking that, Deidre. You say Wall Street's on shaky ground here. I'm like, gosh, I feel like every single day I'm talking about another reason why Wall Street is on shaky ground, and we're watching the markets take yet another dive. Deidre Bozis, thank you. Appreciate it. When we come back, everybody, we are going inside Russia, a place tens of thousands of men are leaving to avoid getting recruited into the military. Our own Keir Simmons spoke with a taxi driver about what's happening to the people who stayed. That's coming up next. Right now, we know that tens of thousands of Russian men have left their country since President Putin announced a partial mobilization to recruit 300,000 more people to fight in the conflict. We've seen images like this coming out. Thousands of Russians lining up in cars to make it across the border, trying to leave for countries like Kazakhstan, Georgia, Turkey as well. But there are people who are staying behind. Keir Simmons connected with a taxi driver in Moscow to find out what folks are going through there. Keir's joining me now to tell us more about his experience. This is fascinating stuff, Keir. And I know, as you well know, obviously, you get the best information from folks that are on the ground, taxi drivers that have everybody in their car, that know the ins and the outs, the working men and women of that country. What did you learn?
It's so true, Yasmin, isn't it? Too often we journalists act like armchair generals, don't we? Like, We talk about geopolitics and conflict as if we're playing a games console. What better way to get reality than to get into the back seat of a cab? Just to fill you in, this cab driver is a businessman who is spending his days as a cab driver now, which just tells you something about what's happening here in Moscow. But listen to what he has to say. First of all, as you're rightly say, he has some incredible anecdotes, what he's learning from people who are in his cab. He also, despite everything, has some pretty stunning things to say about what he thinks of President Putin and that operation in Ukraine. Take a listen.
A few days ago, a couple army boys were sitting here and with a lot of stars. And they said, look, it seems like we're fighting against ourselves. There was a lady, pregnant lady, probably on the 8th month, and she was going around the city trying to find the stuff for her husband.
What stuff?
Oh, look, let's say he's unhappy with army boots, so she's trying to find some special boots for him. She loves her husband and she wants to get him the best. And we know that military can't afford the best.
Russia is fighting for itself, for its survival. Do you hear that opinion?
Yes, but at the same time, most of the people saying that Russia is too big and too strong, maybe a little slow and underdeveloped, but too big and too strong to actually get affected.
Do you think Russia faces what we say an existential threat? Do you think Russia faces...
Yes. It's clearly someone trying to move there to that level. President Putin, since the 90s, that's the best what happened to this country. And I think he's having a tough task. But the idea of rebuilding Russia as one of the major power in the world, that's a correct idea.
Fascinating stuff, Keir. Especially, I mean, we've heard this. We know President Putin has been incredibly popular in Russia for quite some time. I have to say, I was shocked to see that he would even speak to you so freely about some of these topics in Moscow.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? People are more and more now. There was real fear earlier on, around February time, when this whole thing started. More and more now prepared to speak out, prepared to criticize. I think you're right to pick up on a crucial point, which is that there is a huge support for President Putin. You heard it there, and I think that goes back, as he said, to a period of economic success here that people remember. That support is hard to erode, particularly because many Russians feel as if their country's under threat. Look, this is what Russians are saying. It's not what we're saying, it's what Russians are saying, but it's important to understand it if we're going to understand how to get solutions to this terrible crisis that we're living through right now. The thing that's really knocking people's confidence, and he talked about it a little bit at the beginning there, is that question of Russian men serving at the front. It's mostly Russian men. And, of course, that draft of 300,000 Russian men, because that's reaching into families, people's brothers, people's sons, people's husbands. That is, I think, the one thing, and we spoke to a pollster today, a Russian pollster, the one thing that is beginning to have an impact on people's view of President Putin and of what Russia calls its special military operation in Ukraine.
Well, and the fact that he said that they feel as if they're fighting themselves, which is just fascinating. Keir Simmons, really good stuff. Thank you, Keir. Appreciate it. Coming up, everybody, why Baltimore prosecutors decided to drop all charges against Adnan Syed today. That is next in The Local. Some very scary moments, everybody, for some young kids in Pennsylvania today. A carbon monoxide leak at a daycare sent dozens of kids and staffers to the hospital. The poisoning was only alerted after one of the kids fell unconscious. A staffer then immediately called 911 when firefighters showed up. Their monitors for carbon monoxide in the atmosphere quickly went off. The entire facility was then evacuated, fire officials saying there were no carbon monoxide monitors in the building. Emily Akeda is following this story for us today and joining us now. So the paramedics that arrived at the scene, calling this essentially a mass casualty event, what happened from there. And shouldn't a daycare center, by the way, have carbon monoxide monitors inside their facilities?
Yeah, so much to get into with this. So many people impacted. I'll start with the good news. Fortunately, everyone, we're told, is in stable condition right now. So that really is so important. But you can imagine what a scare this must have been for the parents, the families, the friends of all of these people involved. 27 kids were hospitalized, 5 adults hospitalized, sickened by carbon monoxide leak. The utility company says the leak was, quote, caused by a malfunctioning heating unit and blocked venting system. Here's more from fire officials.
That's the problem with CO. You won't smell it, you won't taste it, you won't see it. You're not going to know it's there until you get a meter.
Yasmin, the timing of this is really hard to believe. So there's a city ordinance in Allentown that was passed earlier this year, and it goes into effect later this month that requires daycares to have carbon monoxide monitors. Again, it goes into effect later this month. The daycare says that they were looking to make calls and they started to inquire about installing a carbon monoxide monitor, but it hadn't come to fruition yet. Officials say this really underscores the importance of those detectors.
Absolutely. I mean, thankfully, they were awake when this was happening. Had they all been sleeping, as it sometimes happens when people are sleeping.
And that firefighters, their equipment have those detectors with them, so they were immediately alerted to the high levels.
Yeah, Emily Ikator, thank you so much. Great to see you, Emily.
Yeah, good to see you.
All right, NBC covers hundreds of stories each day, and because you couldn't possibly read, watch, or listen to all of them, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they're telling us is going on down in their regions in a segment that we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, Baltimore prosecutors dropping all charges against Adnan Syed today in the 1999 murder of his ex-girlfriend, Heyman Lee. Officials saying DNA evidence supported Syed's innocence. His case gained national attention after being featured in the first season of the Serial podcast. Prosecutors saying they reached out to the Lee family's lawyer before announcing their decision. Lee's family says they learned the charges were dropped through media accounts. Their attorney says they felt robbed of a voice. From our West Coast Bureau, wildlife officials in Washington state saying endangered gray wolves are being poisoned. They say they're investigating the deaths of 6 animals. Killing an endangered species in the state carries a fine of up to $5,000 and the possibility of a year in jail. Nonprofit groups are offering more than $50,000 in reward for help cracking the case. Also from our West Coast Bureau, but really from our Midwest Bureau. A man from Minnesota broke a national record at a contest in California. He raised the country's heaviest pumpkin. How heavy, you may ask? 2,560 pounds. That tops a record we told you about in New York just last week. That would take a heck of a long time to carve. Still to come, how Florida's mangroves survived Hurricane Ian and helped protect the state from the storm. That's our original tonight. A strategy seemingly straight out of Hollywood seems to have paid off big, like so big that it could save us all one day. I'm talking about a first-of-its-kind mission that involved NASA slamming a spacecraft into a 500-foot wide asteroid and shifting its orbit. These are newly released photos of this collision that happened 2 weeks ago. This asteroid was and is not a threat to Earth. So why did NASA do this? To see if the U.S. could deflect an asteroid so it doesn't hit Earth. Tom Costello is joining me now. This was so fascinating to me, Tom, because we've all seen the movie. Right? We've all seen the movie version of this and wondered if, in fact, that could actually happen in real life. And in fact, it did, touting this $325 million mission as a smashing success. That's from NASA. The leader calling this a watershed moment for planetary defense and for humanity. Overall, the survival of humanity. Can we go so far as to say?
I don't think that's hyperbole. I don't think that's hyperbole. I think it's accurate. I mean, listen, just remember what happened to the dinosaurs, right? They're gone. 65 million years ago, wiped off the planet because a mega asteroid hit Earth. So NASA, and not just NASA, all of our international partners really teamed together and are teaming together to have a strategy here to deflect an asteroid. This was the first test. And look what happened. Can I just make the point? Look down there at the, can we freeze it if it's possible? possible, I want you to look at the dust or the plume. There we go. Look at the dust, the plume coming off that small rock. That's the smaller asteroid that they hit. And when they did, it ejected this massive plume of dust and rock. And that trail, that plume, is now thousands of miles long in space. It worked. But here's what really matters. They wanted to knock it off course. It's in an orbit around that bigger asteroid, okay? The big asteroid's up on top, the smaller one down below. They wanted to knock it off course, off the orbit by about 10 minutes, cut its orbit down by 10 minutes to prove that it worked. They cut it off by a heck of a lot more than that, 32 minutes, that they moved this asteroid. So it's proof of concept here that they can, in theory, move an asteroid off course. And while these asteroids pose no risk to Earth, they're 7 million miles away. The point is the next one that comes our way, maybe they can use this defense or something similar to it.
So quickly here, because you talk about that dust here, right, and the rock kind of that came off during this collision. That's part of kind of the learning process of how they could actually even be more precise, right? How to actually deal with a real life eventuality of something like this happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And listen, this particular asteroid, no risk to Earth. Those particles, no risk. But if they see one coming, and right now they don't see one coming, then hopefully they would have decades, maybe even 100 years to prepare the planet's defensive. And we would coordinate with other countries. So that's the idea. And now we've got a blueprint that shows it worked. So that's why they're very excited about this concept and the fact that all of their math proved to be dead accurate 7 million miles away.
Lesson learned, do not procrastinate.
And study math.
And study math.
That's right.
Don't wait 5 decades to get it right.
Right.
Tom Costello, thanks so much. Appreciate it. All right, we want to bring you today's original with in-depth reporting on a topic that we've been keeping an eye on. And right now, Florida scientists are breathing a sigh of relief after their first aerial assessment of the southern Florida's ecosystems since Hurricane Ian. Why? So they found that most of the state's mangrove forests were largely unharmed by Ian. Florida's mangroves are crucial because they're able to pull large amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere, in addition to being a first line of defense to strong storms. So before Ian, our team traveled down to Florida's Rookery Bay to find out how the mangroves are being restored and how they're being protected. But we also went back after Ian to see how they managed to weather the storm. Maura Barrett has the story.
Hurricane Ian, with its 150-mile-per-hour winds, ripping through Florida, killing more than 100 people in the state and endangering wildlife on the coastline, including 600,000 acres of mangroves, vital trees that grow along the coast where the tide comes in. Their dense tangle of exposed roots stabilize the coastline.
What we tend to think of is mangrove forests as being this beating heart. So as the tides come in and out, that's very much like the arteries carrying blood in and out of the heart.
Providing a buffer from extreme storms.
They're kind of the shock absorbers and giant sponges that can absorb that water and the shocks of wave energy and other things.
The mangroves remove carbon from the atmosphere, which is key in fighting climate change. While mangroves cover less than 1% of tropical forests worldwide, each year they remove more than 24 million metric tons of carbon from the atmosphere. Hurricane Irma in 2017 demolished 40% of the Everglades mangroves. Stagnant floodwater cut off their oxygen supply, killing off entire forests. But the wetlands and its mangrove forests actually fared well during Hurricane Ian. And it appears the storm helped clear out persistent algae that was impacting tree growth on the southern tip of Florida, according to the Miami Herald. More than 100 miles northwest, areas near the eye of Hurricane Ian produced preliminary storm surge of more than 15 feet, causing extensive and costly damage. Meanwhile, just next door, Rookery Bay saw similar levels of storm surge. The mangroves protecting the coast, though, softened the blow. This footage, taken right after Hurricane Ian in Rookery Bay, shows a live example of why the Florida Department of Environmental Protection is working to keep these mangroves healthy as a first line of defense against strong storms and to fight climate change.
When we talk about healthy mangroves, this is exactly what we're talking about. This is a very healthy mangrove ecosystem.
A week before Ian hit, our team traveled to Rookery Bay to see that restoration firsthand.
We restore a mangrove or wetland. Those can, in theory at least, restore carbon back to the land and sequester it, kind of put it away and lock it up away from the atmosphere and put it into nature.
If you have a weak system, a stress system, a non-healthy system, it is not going to be able to withstand those large impacts from storms such as hurricanes.
And with experts saying climate change is contributing to more intense hurricanes, mangroves are proving to be a key investment to keep that heart beating.
This isn't just about protecting nature for its own sake, the pretty trees and the birds. It's about us. It's about having more resilient and more secure kind of coastlines where a lot of people live in a world that's increasingly dangerous thanks to climate change.
All right, and Maura is joining us now. So we know now, Maura, how important these mangroves actually are. What is the plan when it comes to more investment supporting these mangroves going forward?
Well, Yasmin, as coastal risks continue to rise, the Florida Department of Environment's new coastal restoration team is ready to fund even more of these types of projects, investing over $640 million already. And in turn, projects that restore mangroves are proven to prevent tens of thousands of dollars in damages during each of these storms. That's according to the Nature Conservancy. Now, we're talking about a very strong Category 4 hurricane, so anything to soften the effects of that can go a long way. The natural habitats will heal on their own and be ready for the next major storm. Yasmin?
All right, Maura Barrett for us. Thank you, Maura. Good to see you. That wraps this hour for us, everybody. We're going to have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.